the faces in it to get it, move it with your cursor out of the way to see this entire beautiful piece of artwork of the seal. This piece and many of the other pieces of artwork that you're going to see tonight were done by an East Hampton artist named Scott Bluedorn, who's quite the naturalist in his own right and does a lot of beautiful, beautiful work concerning nature. But we're particularly happy with this cover of a report that I'll show you later. So if you're not familiar with Plum Island, or even if you are, I'm going to review some basics. And here it is at the east end of the North Fork of Long Island, about 1.5 miles off of Orient Point. And you'll see that it's shaped a little bit like a stringy pork chop. And the area under the name Plum Island there, see if I can bring that up again. That stripy area is a 96-acre freshwater wetland, which I can show you later. And of course, we love Plum Island for many reasons, but I would have to say first and foremost because it's got such an amazing diversity of natural communities in such a small area. And if you do compare it with another park, you might say, of the same size, Central Park, you can see by the statistics at the bottom that Plum Island has more native species there. And in 2015, there were 32 species found there that nobody knew were there. The New York Natural Heritage Program mapped the ecological communities that they found on Plum Island in 2012 and came up with this diagram showing where they are. And this actually was not based on field work. This was based on previous literature and aerial photographs. They didn't get on the island until 2015 when they were able to do a 4-season ecological biodiversity survey. But they did find 5 ecological communities they considered to be significant: Maritime Beach, Maritime Bluff, Maritime Dunes, Marine Eelgrass community, and Rocky Intertidal Zone. But there are about 25 different ecological communities there on only 822 acres. It's pretty remarkable. Many rare plants were found. These, I believe, were first inventoried using the literature from previous studies of the island. And then when they went back in 2015, they found fewer species. And one of them was in, the population had diminished quite a bit because of mowing by the Department of Homeland Security. And here's a view of the beautiful 96-acre freshwater wetland on the island. We're just beginning to study it, or I shouldn't say we are, but people who've had a chance to study Plum Island at all still haven't done much with the wetland, and there's lots to be learned about it. There are some folks on the island right now who work for Homeland Security who are interested in the wildlife around them, and they've contributed to a bird list that's now up to 228 species. Putting that in context, it's between 24 and 25% of all the species in North America north of Mexico. And if you think about all the different ecological communities and habitats in North America, reaching up to the Arctic and into Alaska, through the Rockies, through the deserts, there's to think that nearly a quarter of them can exist on 822 acres, not too far from New York City, is pretty darned remarkable. So here you can see the American black duck, the northern harrier, the eider, common tern, American oyster catcher, American bittern, piping plover, roseate tern. And the seals. My goodness, the seals on Plum Island are remarkable. They come down from the Arctic in the winter. They start arriving around September. And on some winter days, they've found upwards of 600 seals, harbor seals primarily, hauled out on the rocks on the south side of Plum Island. It's considered the largest seal haul out area in the state of New York and one of the largest in southern New England. But as you probably know, islands don't just stop at the waterline. They continue sloping down to the bottom. And we have sent divers, scientific divers, down into the waters around Plum Island to look at the benthos, the living material at the bottom, in initial surveys. And the last one was the summer of 2019, where they spent 3.5 days under the water around Plum Island and produced a report for the New York Natural Heritage Program, sponsored by one of the donors at Save the Sound. And it's really interesting. And you can get that report as well as the other, the biodiversity report at New York nynhp.org, nynhp.org/Plum Island. And all those reports would be available there. The scientific divers told us that around Plum Island, there are giant boulders, of course, glacial erratics, but they're under the water. And they're covered with marine life. They told us that there isn't a square inch of hard surface that down there that is not covered with marine life. It includes these anemones, various sponges, 30-foot long strands of kelp, fronds of kelp, bryozoans, marine worms, northern star coral, and a variety of other species. And one of the divers who'd wanted to be there for the last 30 years or more said it far exceeded his expectations, and his expectations were high. But it's not just the biodiversity and ecological wonders of Plum Island that intrigue us, it's also its history. The Plum Island Lighthouse, built in 1869 here, was the second lighthouse. First one was built in 1824, it didn't last that long. This one's still here. It's been replaced by, in its function as a light, by a metal scaffolding that you can't see in this picture. But it has this historical significance, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. As you can see from the rust, it's in need of care, and some money's been appropriated for stabilization, but as far as we know, no work has begun on it. At this point, that would be a responsibility of the owner of the island, which is the Department of Homeland Security. And Fort Terry, built in 1897 as an outgrowth of our fortifications in the face of the Spanish-American War. The view you're looking at is back toward Orient Point. We're at about the midpoint of the island, slightly west of the midpoint, looking west over the remaining expanse of the island and out to Orient. You see Plum Gut in the between the two land masses with boats coming and going. The water tower that you see in the distance is right in front of the Animal Disease Laboratory. And in the foreground are the remains of Fort Terry, which has quite a bit of historical significance of its own. And we understand that the Department of Homeland Security finally has come to recognize that and has set up an historic district, a Plum Island Historic District that includes important features like this. And here's the place everybody thinks about when they think about Plum Island, the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, where about 400 people work on a daily basis. They're still there. It operates 24 hours a day. About half the people come from Connecticut, and the other half are from the town of Southold, some from Riverhead and Shelter Island. The area with the black roof is the newest part of the lab. It's an administration building with an auditorium, classrooms, offices, and the rest of it are the animal holding areas and the laboratories. All those sticks coming up off the roof are air filters, and the entire building complex operates under negative pressure to make sure that every bit of air goes through those filters. So it's a very hard building to heat, and it's very difficult to think of another use for it. But there it is. It's the site of world-class research on animal diseases. It's the place where the vaccine for foot and mouth disease was developed. And now people come from all over the world to pick up vials of the vaccine and bring it back to their countries. Veterinarians come in from all over the world to learn about foot and mouth disease and African swine fever. Those are the two main areas of interest in this lab. I'm not aware of any anthrax work that was done there. There's always rumors about this place, but we are all capable of changing our point of view as well, and accepting the fact that our entire economy would crash if foot and mouth disease were to get in the wild, affecting our beef industry and our lamb industry, our pork industry. It would really be devastating to our economy, and the scientists and veterinarians here can also be looked at as heroes, at least in my view. But as Jennifer was pointing out, this lab is now going to close. They've built the new lab in Manhattan, Kansas. The money that was originally set aside for the new lab that they thought they were going to get from selling the island no longer is needed, because the new lab got its own appropriations, and as Jennifer pointed out, was fortified. So that lab is getting ready to go online in the next few years, and slowly and surely they are starting to move equipment and things that they need out to there. Then they're going to decommission this area, sanitize it, decontaminate it, as well as some of the other buildings, and set the island up for transfer. Well, if Plum Island's so great, then what's the problem? And the problem is one that I just mentioned, that Congress thought that they could get a lot of money from the island to set up the new lab. And they passed this legislation in a big omnibus bill. If you may remember the stimulus bill of 2008. And they updated it in 2012 as well to find a new use for the money if it wasn't needed for the new lab. And we sort of took umbrage at this. Many people did, including the North Shore Audubon Society. And we formed the Preserve Plum Island Coalition. Now we've got 117 groups in this coalition. It is led by us at Save the Sound. We also have very strong partners in our steering committee. That includes a number of the top environmental organizations you're already familiar with here on the island, as well as some other groups that are interested in historic preservation and other topics. But we wanted to reverse that terrible legislation, and so we went to the Capitol. We've been down there a couple of times, and isn't it nice to see smiling faces in front of the dome? It's kind of a different thing now when you see the Capitol Dome and how it affects you emotionally. At least it does for me. And but I remember this as being a very happy occasion. Going down, you recognize some of your colleagues there, and we met with senators and congressmen, and I guess one of the most important meetings we had was with staffers on the then majority side, the Senate majority side in the Environment and Public Works Committee, who basically said, you know, we're not in the business of holding on to land that we don't need anymore. And you guys think that you can turn this into a preserve. You say you want research and conservation. That's not enough. We need a plan. Tell us what it is you want. And it's just sort of like getting the orders from the Wizard of Oz to get the broomstick. We went off and began to try to come up with a plan. So Save the Sound and the Nature Conservancy got together, and we raised money separately and pooled it, and hired this firm called Marstel Day. Has experience in turning federal properties into conservation status. It's something that we didn't know a whole lot about, and they did. So they helped us put together 3 workshops. Sheila was at all of them. She basically ran them for us, and she'll say she didn't, but I know she did. We had a bunch of smaller meetings as well with public officials, elected officials at all levels of government, people in planning departments, people in town, county, state governments. We met with all the experts that we could find. We also included people from historical societies, Native American communities, universities, and we started asking questions and of the groups and learning what research we still needed to undertake, and then bringing the answers to those questions to the next workshop and so on. And we had an iterative process and came up with some results. And here's our first meeting at the Cornell Cooperative Extension in Riverhead. You may recognize some of these folks and maybe not, but this is where all the questions first started to arise. The second meeting we had at Brookhaven National Lab during the Long Island Natural History Conference, which I think some of you attend on a regular basis. Some of you were in this. I see Pat Aiken, she was part of it. I know she's with us tonight. She's there on the left. Artie Kopelman from the Coastal Research and Education Society of Long Island's covering his face there. He's there. You may recognize Carl Safina over on the right. We really took advantage of this convening of scientists and naturalists on Long Island to, you know, as the expression goes, pick their brains. We worked it in 1 hour and 20-minute time period during the lunch period of the conference and tried to get their points of view on future uses of Plum Island. And these were folded into reports that we wrote later. The basis of all of the planning that we asked all of our participants to think about was the zoning that the town of Southold undertook to place on Plum Island in 2013. So just as the coalition started to form around 2010, 2011, 2012, Southold realized that if the island was going to be sold, it might end up in private hands of a developer, in which case zoning would be needed. And being that it had been in federal hands for so long, it had no zoning on it. So the town undertook its own studies and decided that the best uses would be for research and conservation. The purple area on the left is the Plum Island Research District, and the rest is the Plum Island Conservation District. This is what the town envisioned for future uses. They set up a schedule for density and lot size and allowable uses. And we use those as the basis for all of the Envision Plum Island work. And here we come up with the reports. They're available on that website. If anybody can quickly write that into the chat, it would be helpful, so you all could go to it later. Appreciate that. I can also give it to you again at the end. The pictorial brochure is quick. You can turn the pages right there on the web page, and there you will see a lot of Scott Bluedorn's beautiful artwork, giving visual images of what the region's vision for Plum Island is. The full report is over 70 pages, also has photos and illustrations, but it's a very detailed report on what we heard from the region on what the future uses for Plum Island should be. It also lists all the participants, and you will see that goes on for pages and pages. We had a lot of input on this. And here it is. This is the vision in a nutshell, Plum Island Preserve. So this map lays out the concept. If you remember the map of the zoning area, the zoning districts, there were two main districts, research on the left and conservation on the right. Here there are 5 divisions. So we took the basic divisions and added a few more divisions. The research district on the left side here, where the stripes are mostly, we added another district around the lighthouse because we saw that visitation to the lighthouse had its own needs, its own parameters to think about, and they might be quite distinct from what the needs might be in the research district. The southern district, where sort of central, where it's brown and green, includes the freshwater wetland and the rare maritime dune community. We consider that area to be a place that would be very lightly attended, if at all. It would mostly be set aside for researchers, academics, researchers in archaeology or history or natural history or science, whatever, and perhaps their students, and probably accessed by permit or special permission. The area to the far east on the right, the skinny area, would also be sort of set aside for research. Perhaps members of the public could visit it with docents, people who wanted to go see the gun batteries and other remnants of the military history that remain. And the central area where Fort Terry is would be the area most often visited, you might say on a scheduled basis. There'd be ways for the public to come, walk around. Hopefully there'll be some trails, maybe some boardwalks, with or without a docent or a guide. But we're expecting that this would be something, again, not heavily trodden or heavily used, but by some type of a permit or appointment system. In the upper left is an aerial of the Plum Island Ferry Terminal, which is immediately adjacent and contiguous with the Cross Sound Ferry Terminal at Orient Point. So you'll see a yellow line around the ferry terminal. That's an area recently zoned just last year by the town of Southold, exclusively for use by ferries to go to and from Plum Island. That was another coup, in a good way, a major accomplishment by the Plum Island Coalition, because previously the zoning there had been for very intensive use. It was called Marine 2, and it allowed any number of very intense uses. Now there's a brand new zone there, and it's only for ferry travel to and from Plum Island, plus the allowance of a potential small museum. So Plum Island Preserve means a number of things to us, not just to preserve its ecological value, but we want to preserve history and cultural heritage. And it's really important to the Southold and to the region to preserve high quality jobs there. Here's another illustration by Scott Bluedorn across the bottom. You'll see more of these. And if you're a plant nut like I am, you look at one of the New York Natural Heritage Program documents I referred to earlier, you'll see that he studied them and found some of the rare plants in order to illustrate them here, which is pretty cool. And his concept of Plum Island's nature as well. So anyway, we see Plum Island as an opportunity zone, an opportunity to have a new park, an opportunity to continue research and provide education. So let's talk a little about what's the region's vision for the conservation district is. That's the preponderance of Plum Island. The goal, of course, the main goal, to protect biodiversity, but also to recognize and do research on cultural heritage. We know some of the history of Plum Island going back a few hundred years, but we can't ignore the fact that people have been using Long Island and Plum Island for 10,000 years. And not a whole lot is known about the uses of Plum Island prior to European contact. The Montaukett Indians participated in Envision Plum Island, and they're intensely interested in being able to study their heritage more thoroughly with Plum Island being preserved. But as you saw with Fort Terry and the lighthouse, historical interpretation of all the uses of Plum Island after European contact are also very worthwhile endeavors. And there are opportunities on the island to do some ecological restoration. Although the island's been left fallow for about 70 years, which has allowed the wildlife to return, it's also allowed some invasive species to set roots there, and so some ecological restoration would be needed. But we're envisioning people and like these geologists, the Long Island Geological Association, being able to go to the island and inspect and learn. This was just a field trip. They were heading out to look at the bluffs and see some real great examples of how Plum Island was formed. I know that Brett Bennington from Hofstra University was along on this trip, and everybody learned an awful lot. We think that there'd be a couple of buildings that could be useful to researchers. One, taking just one of them perhaps to restore it and bring life back to it. This is a potential candidate for that, for perhaps a small dorm and or a small classroom. The town of Southold was preferring not to have people staying overnight on Plum Island, but you could see that there might be the potential for people who've come from far away to want to stay maybe one night, not to take up residency there in any way. So something like this might not require a zone change and might be something that the town would tolerate and would be a good feature for future use in research. Now, the research district in this photo is the part closest to you, and you can also see the harbor where the ferry comes in from Orient Point and lands. There's some utility buildings in the harbor area, and then you can see a road leading off, sweeping off to the left over to those black and white buildings, and you see the fuel tanks over there on the far left. So that's where the lab is today. You can see the wetlands stretching out before you on the right in all of its glory, and Plum Island's tail all the way to the east. You can also see the next island over. You can see the next two islands over, Great Gull and Little Gull. So the thoughts are for the research district to find a new use. And the idea that the region liked the best was to find a use that could help keep the rest of the island sustained in some way. In other words, it would hopefully be a profitable enterprise of some type, or a way that could spin off some revenue or other resources for the other activities on Plum Island. It might be the generator of a need for those ferries to come back and forth, and those would then also serve to bring tourists onto Plum Island in the manner that I had described earlier, in sort of a scheduled way. We got a great boost last January of 2020, just before COVID hit, from the Long Island Association, New York's, Long Island's premier business organization. And they set up priorities every year for what their board would like to see happen, and what they'd like to see legislation on, what they'd like to lobby for, and so forth. And they included Plum Island in their priorities for 2020 as being part of the Long Island Research Corridor, which is something they've been promoting for biotechnology. It now includes Brookhaven National Lab, Cold Spring Harbor Labs, Northwell Health, Weill, Cornell Weill, and it hops over to Roosevelt Island, where the Cornell's Tata Institute is, up to Manhattan, where the Genome Institute is. So those at the Long Island Association are thinking of it as the Island Research Corridor, and they thought that Plum Island should be part of it, not as an area where there's ongoing research, but where there's research opportunities and where new funding is needed. This was a real boost for us. And the Long Island Association also hosted our third Envision Plum Island conference, and we're very grateful to them for that. So it's been great to have them involved. I talked about the tourism. What I didn't mention is that there were a number of people who thought the lighthouse might have a future as a bed and breakfast or as a visitors center. And yet, as I pointed out on the map earlier, it would be sort of cordoned off from the research district, but perhaps there'd be easements between there and the rest of the island that could allow people coming on to the island, leaving the ferry, going to the lighthouse, and then finding their way over to the conservation district through some easement in the research district. We did find interest from the New London Maritime Society, a strong interest in stewardship and use of this lighthouse. They're very eager to help. And then there's those that administration building. Wouldn't it be great if it could be reformed into something that did provide high quality jobs? And again, might be suitable for things that you want to have away from a population center, like some type of maybe biotechnology, or something that requires an island. So in this visualization, we're showing some work done perhaps with mariculture or some type of aquaculture in a lab there, surrounded by extraordinarily clean waters. Plum Island is a great spot to think about for estuarine and marine research or climate change types of activities. But we'd like to retain the jobs there. And then in terms of also reusing structures, we're thinking also of the administration building at the Plum Island Ferry Dock in Orient Point, that might be a good structure for a small museum or a visitor's center, a place to get tickets perhaps to come and visit Plum Island. You might hop off the Cross Sound Ferry if you've come in from Connecticut, walk next door, go into the visitor's center for the Plum Island Museum, and get a ticket to come on another ferry back over to Plum Island. It seems like it could work. Here's a visualization of how that might happen. Some people were concerned that if we were having tourists come to Plum Island, even in limited numbers, it might add to traffic congestion on the North Fork, which has become a real serious concern because there are very few thoroughfares on the North Fork, and it does get backed up. So the idea of visitors even coming in from Connecticut and walking a few steps over to the Plum Island ferry terminal might actually reduce the need for any car travel, any additional car travel through the North Fork. And here's a closer view of that ferry terminal. On the far right, outside the red line, you see the Cross Sound ferry terminal and the lanes where the cars line up to board. You can see it really, they are completely adjacent to one another. This harbor area in this is 2.5 acres by itself. The whole parcel is 9.5 acres. So it's a really significant win for Plum Island's future that Southold was smart enough to zone this just for Plum Island so that it would not fall into developers' hands and become some hotel, motel, restaurant, convention center, or some other thing, or even an expanded Cross Sound ferry operation. Might not have been the greatest. And on the immediate to the left, you see another bunch of slips, boat slips. That was just recently bought by a billionaire who has done quite a bit of development on the South Fork. So you could see on both sides were potential development concerns, pressures, you might say, from the adjoining owners. And it was very bold of Southold to zone this specifically for use for Plum Island. We're very grateful for that. I won't go into too much detail about how Marsdell Day helped us, but they did. They helped us a great deal because they do have this expertise in how to turn federal properties into conservation. And they really taught us a lot. And they taught us that there are two main ways that New York, which is our desired recipient, when I say our, I mean the region's desired recipient for Plum Island, two main ways that New York could get Plum Island. One would be in a public benefit conveyance, the other would be a negotiated sale. And a public benefit conveyance allows the federal government to convey Plum Island to the state at either no cost or very little cost, as long as it were to be used for park or conservation purposes, or to, let's say, put the research district into public health or public education uses. And then the negotiated sale option is another form of a public benefit conveyance, but it mainly the buyer has to pay fair market value. The bonus for such a buyer is that then they're not restricted in future use of the island. So we learned a lot more about that, but I don't want to get into too much detail on that just because it's not everybody's interest. But we did learn it's possible, and there are these conveyance pathways for Plum Island to reach New York. But first, we would need to get Plum Island off the auction block. If we didn't get Plum Island off the auction block, we would never be able to have what is known as the standard federal property disposal process proceed. And in a nutshell, that means that one federal agency doesn't want it anymore, it gets offered to other federal agencies. If no other federal agencies want it, it gets offered to New York. If New York doesn't want it, it gets offered to counties, town, or even not-for-profits. So it's like this hierarchy that it's in code. It's the way the federal government usually gets rid of properties. We couldn't have Plum Island go through this process because Plum Island was on the auction block. But if we could get it off the auction block, we could then have New York pursue wildlife conservation, historic preservation, and other positive outcomes. So this is what we needed to do. Repeal the problem legislation, the 2008 and 2012 legislation. Ta-da! This just happened 2 months ago. You may have read about it in the paper. We're all thrilled. Still kind of on a high from all of this, and now realize we have to go through the next steps. But boy, was everybody thrilled. We got help from Connecticut and New York, from Senate and from House of Representatives. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And they brought it home for us. And now we need help from New York. We need New York to feel ready to take Plum Island. And this is where the Preserve Plum Island Coalition is right now, is working with the relationships we've been establishing for the last 6 years or so with New York at various levels in the agencies, in the executive chamber, and priming the state to be ready to accept it when it's offered. Because we don't really think that a federal agency is going to accept Plum Island. We don't know that for sure, but it's a strong suspicion. And we think that New York would be a very good prospect. You know, Orient Beach State Park is 1.5 miles away, just across the water. And there are some efficiencies you could think about in managing Plum Island with that park already there. So we think Plum Island Preserve is feasible. We know it has broad support, and we strongly believe that New York can make it a reality. I want to thank you both, all of you. Also, don't know why I said both. I want to thank all of you for inviting me here tonight and to talk to you about this. And I'll let you see all the organizations that helped fund our work on Envision Plum Island below. Here's the website again for the Envision report. Again, if you want to see the biodiversity inventory or the underwater survey, that would be nynhp.org/Plum Island, all run together. PLUMISLAND, all run together.
Repeat that one more time.
That would be NYN, that's for like New York Natural, HP, Heritage Program, .org/Plum Island. Plum Island all run together in one word.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to take any questions you might have and talk some more, if you like.
We have a question in chat. How visible is the marine life on the glacial rocks? And did you investigate a possible marine park?
We have not investigated a possible marine park, but it's a fabulous idea. We would, I think, just because there's so much amazing biodiversity in this unique place, we would want to safeguard what's there and would want to make sure that specimens were not taken. It would be a great place for research and perhaps guided diving, but it might, you know, I'm just thinking about this right now. Recreational divers can bring a lot of good attention to an area, but we also would want to make sure they don't cause any damage. I could also tell you that which I neglected to tell you before, that there's an area all around Plum Island, Great Gull, and Little Gull Islands that New York State designated as a marine mammal and sea turtle protection area in 2019, in December of 2019. And so that is now an official zone. It goes out about 1,500 feet around the island, or at least to a depth of 15 feet. And it's an area to call attention to the fabulous resources there. It's not adding any particular regulations or extra security to the area, but it is to highlight the special resources. And as far as the glacial boulders, yes, they're covered with marine life. And that's what our divers reported to us, that every hard surface they could find down there was just absolute. They found no bare space on any hard surfaces, all encrusted in one way or another with marine life, plant or animal. And the rest of it are shifting sands. The currents are very swift, so the sands shift rapidly. The currents are pretty tough. So it's the hard surfaces where the marine life is found. And of course, Plum Gut is well known for its fish resources. The highly oxygenated waters there and the mixing of estuarine waters from Long Island Sound and the Peconic Estuary all come together around Plum Island. So you not only have a place that's been left to go wild because nobody's touched it since the Army left in 1952, but you've got these clean marine waters and estuarine waters swirling around with lots of oxygen. So it's a really, really special place for biodiversity.
We have a couple, we have a couple more questions in chat. One of them was, how soon could we visit? Another is there a stream connection between the wetlands and the marine water? And is the island at risk from rising sea levels?
Oh, 3 great questions. I hope I can remember them all.
Oh, and I'm going to make one suggestion, since you're one of those people. You might want to think about, in terms of the marine area, what the island of Bonaire has done, because their reef is their economy. They have put up moorings, and the only places you're allowed to moor is on those moorings. You can't throw an anchor down and damage the reef. So they have selected sites where they've put down permanent moorings, and that's it.
That's a good idea. The waters around this whole area are owned by the state of New York. And so those are good suggestions. If we ever do get the island into the state's hands, that would be, I'm sure if we do, then management planning has to proceed at that point. And we will be asking everybody in the region to participate in that. Again, what we laid out in our vision is just that. It's not a management plan. It's our ideas for for future uses, but the place needs careful management. Let's see if I can remember the questions. The first one was, can you visit? I think that was the first question. And the answer is, right now you cannot. For many years you could, and it was a good thing. Many groups got a chance to go there and see how fabulous it was. And that's one of the ways we built the coalition up. But in May of 2018, we think because Department of Homeland Security was beginning their cleanup and their packing up in earnest at that point, they decided to cut off the tours. And it's a sorry thing, because we'd really like to get some people back on there, not just folks like yourselves, but also people like the governor or the commissioner of state parks to convince them what a fabulous acquisition it would be. So this is something we're working on now. And we do have a new administration at the federal level, and we may see doors open again. That would be really good. I think another question was about the wetland. No, there's no stream connection between the wetland and the marine waters, but the wetland seems to have become brackish, and people are thinking this might be from washover events, big storms like Sandy and things like that. It seems to have been established. I mean, we're guessing, but it looks to have been established in a dune ecosystem as sands were accreting around that end of the island. You can see what look like old dunes crossing through the wetland. That stripe, those stripes you see in the wetland in the previous pictures might be the crests of old dunes. But yes, getting to the third question about sea level rising, certainly in storms, this narrow portion you see of the island here, this sort of narrow neck in this view, had water, had waves crashing over it. It wasn't split off, but that we heard about happened during Sandy. We do expect sea level rise to have an effect on the island. It may end up as 2 islands. It might breach right there. The Nature Conservancy has looked at, has done some resiliency mapping to look at sea level rise using the elevations on the island. And they do see some of the areas as being quite vulnerable and other areas staying high and dry for a long time. So it's not as though the island's going to go under the sea anytime soon, but its configuration may change. Are there any other, did I answer those questions, all the right questions?
2 more questions.
Okay.
Has a National Historic Site or monument within the park system been considered? And how does the fact that a billionaire bought the dock next to the ferry affect what you want to do with the island?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. It may not affect anything, but at the time that that the ferry terminal on the Orient Point side was still zoned for intensive development, there was a concern that and before the repeal of the legislation that put Plum Island on the auction block, we were concerned that Plum Island would go up to auction, that people like that gentleman would be able to bid for the whole thing, claim Plum Island for himself, make it into a resort, and expand from his site over into the Plum Island ferry terminal. Not that he proposed to, but it was a perceived threat. So that's why we were concerned. Now Plum Island's off the auction block. It will be transferred to a federal agency or to New York or something else. If there are no takers, it will go on the auction block again. So we are hoping there'll be a good conservation outcome, and we're hoping to make sure that happens. That's what our work is to guide the future of Plum Island toward a conservation outcome. So the question was National Park Service. Yes, we've thought about that. One of the earlier ideas was that because of its biodiversity, it might be suitable for to be a national wildlife refuge. It doesn't appear that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is interested or has the capacity to do the kind of stewardship on this island that would be needed. National Park Service, people we have spoken to, they think that Plum Island has all the right features to be deserving of a special resource study, which is something that National Park Service excels at, and they can do a study and focus in on history or archaeology, cultural resources, natural resources, and come up with what they think might be the best plan for a place like Plum Island. We don't know. We're going to have perhaps a new Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, if she gets the approval. She's been nominated. That's going to potentially bring focus on Indian cultural heritage on the island. Would the town of Southold want Plum Island to be a national park? Maybe not. They may not be very excited about having that on a national map of parks because they just have so much trouble with traffic. But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be or couldn't be. We're looking at all the options, and we have been discussing the various options. But we're still thinking that in terms of the sort of the caliber of the government level that would be the right size with the right resources might be the state of New York. You know, the county's broke right now, the town too small to handle this, and certainly not financially able to. Federal government might be too big to care about a little island off the east end of Long Island, and they may not get there often enough. Maybe the New York State would be just right.
Louise, can you tell me if there is turtles nesting or just using it as a safe place, resting place?
Well, we know snapping turtles use the island. I believe box turtles have been seen there. But the sea turtles are not nesting. They are swimming by. It's been known for several decades that some of the sea turtles use the estuarine waters of eastern Long Island Sound and this general area of islands for development of their juveniles.
Okay.
And like the Kemp's Ridley.
Mhm.
I think I saw Byron Young earlier. He said he saw a green turtle out by Orient Point once. We know they're out there.
Yes, I have seen a green turtle, at least one green turtle caught in the local trap nets when they were fishing there.
See, I do listen to you, Byron.
Are there any other questions from people?
The pecking order is that the federal departments get first dibs and then New York State is next.
Yes, that's how they normally do it. And the other factor here is that there is a new administration. And I know from having worked at the federal level that when the parties shift and there's a new administration, people sit and wait a little bit to see what's the mood, what's the tenor, how are things going to be under the new leader. All the new agency heads are getting their feet under them and figuring out what their agencies do and how to do those, follow policies. There's a little bit of a lag, and that's not a bad thing for us right now, because we don't think New York is particularly set up right now and ready. Although we've been priming them, they have a concern about cleaning up the contamination on Plum Island before they would accept it. And it's legitimate. The Army wasn't very clean when they were there from 1897 to 1952. They buried and just tossed a lot of waste around. Some of that's been cleaned up. But then the early days of the lab, before they knew much about foot and mouth disease and were starting their research on it, they were concerned about taking anything off the island. So everything got buried on the island. And that included, vials of glass from the laboratories and dead animals and whatever else. So a lot of those burial pits have been identified and cleaned up already. And the DEC, the New York State DEC, is overseeing the cleanup and negotiating back and forth with the Department of Homeland Security on how far to go with the cleanup, what the state is going to demand. And that's not just because the state might want Plum Island. They're just demanding this anyway because of our laws, our laws protecting groundwater, our laws regarding solid waste and hazardous waste. So DEC is implementing laws already on the books and making sure the federal government complies. And they have yet to come up with an agreement on the final plan for cleanup. In the meantime, under governor's orders from 2013, the lab is doing a better job with the waste they're creating on a daily basis, and they are operating under a consent order from the DEC and doing things the way the state wants them to. So long story short, the island does need to go through a decontamination, and the federal government will always hold the liability, no matter who the subsequent owner becomes. And even for emerging contaminants, things that nobody knew were bad, if they show up later, the federal government still would be liable. But the state really needs to feel secure about the future of Plum Island's groundwater and soils before it makes a move. So we're trying to help them move things along and advocating for all the pieces to come together. And we were going to be starting this year a campaign somewhere a little later in the year, we think, to asking people like yourselves and other members of the coalition to press on New York to seriously consider taking Plum Island when the time is right.
You can see the difficulty Long Island has with the damage that the Navy and Grumman did with the water there.
Mhm.
Even though they're responsible, there's still a problem.
Right. And so you can see why people would be a little skittish. There's a tremendous groundswell of support for protecting Plum Island. You know, when we were on our way down to Washington, before we had 117 organizations in the coalition, I guess at that time we might have had 98 or somewhere around there. And somebody said, well, how many individuals is that? And somebody got on their smartphone and started looking up how many members does National Audubon have? How many members does the Nature Conservancy have? How many members does Sierra Club have? And so forth. And they did one of those quick back of the envelope calculations on just the largest organizations in our coalition and determined that we have between 3 and 6 million individuals represented by those organizations. Now we have 117 organizations, including the Endangered Species Coalition, and that coalition has over 900 organizations in it. So there's a lot of support for protecting Plum Island. We just need to find a good way to do it. And this vision, it helps us to believe it's possible. But we need to continue the drumbeat. You're absolutely right about the Calverton property and the Navy property.
Any other questions from anybody? Any other questions?
Well, it's been my pleasure to talk to you all tonight. I really appreciate you attending.
Louise, can you hear me right now?
Yes.
I want to thank you from the North Shore Audubon membership. You did a fabulous presentation. The pictures are wonderful. I went to the Long Island Council presentation when you were there and you were rushed, but this was a fabulous presentation and you explained everything wonderfully.
Thank you,
So
Jill.
thank you very much for coming and we really appreciate it. And if you could hear us, we're cheering and clapping very enthusiastically. So let us know.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Let us know if there's anything that the North Shore Audubon can do to further the possibility of preserving this area.
I have a question on that. We do send out e-newsletters to all of the coalition members. So somebody at North Shore Audubon Society must receive our e-newsletters, you know, our electronic newsletters about Plum Island. And it goes out, I don't know, about 4 times a year. Do those get distributed to your members?
I haven't received any as of yet. Does anybody, Jennifer, have you received anything?
No, I am not getting those. So Louise, maybe we can get a new email added to that list.
Okay, let's work on that, Jennifer, make sure. And then you all can be kept abreast of our, you know, quarterly accomplishments and so forth. And we will have, we'll have a campaign coming up later this year, as I said, for people to get involved. And it may be sending a postcard or pushing a button on our website to send a letter or something like that.
That would be great. Absolutely. Again, Louise, thank you. Harrison, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill.
And,
Thank you, Jennifer.
Jennifer, is there anything else you want to do tonight?
Louise, are you looking for help
Sorry.
in urging New York State to take on this? Or you're waiting till the feds finish it?
No, we have to do everything all at the same time. You know, we're moving in parallel on a lot of issues, and we have a steering committee, and we break up the tasks. So yes, if you have contacts at New York, happy to talk to you offline about that. Maybe I did have my email address up earlier. I can put that back up for you if you want to email me. Let's see, where did I have it? Here at the end. And you can, any of you feel free, please, to contact me at any time with questions or ideas. There you go, lharrison@savethesound.org. And you may want to take a look at that brochure and the report there at preserveplumisland.org. We have a little bit of upkeep to do on that website, unfortunately. There's a little bit behind the times, but we'll be working on that in the next week or two.
And I just remind people to visit the North Shore Audubon website to look at our upcoming programs and walks. If you're on Facebook, join our Facebook group. And I think that's it.
All right. Everybody, thank you for joining us again. Louise, thank you so much and
Thank
have a good night. Stay safe.
Night.
Night.
Bye-bye.